Hello, everyone. Today in this presentation, we're going to be talking a little bit about who Deep Instinct is, how we got started, what it is we do, and a little bit of an overview of the product itself. So to kind of get started, my name is Brian Black. I'm a senior sales engineer here at Deep Instinct. I've been with the company a little over 2 years now, and I will be going through not just the presentation about the company, but also further presentations regarding the differences between deep learning and machine learning, as well as a product and demo overview. So, to get started, a little bit about Deep Instinct. We were founded in 2015. Our three co-founders were Dr. Eli David, Guy Caspi, who is our CEO, and Nadav Mammon, which is our CTO. We have over 120 employees in 5 locations around the world. And that registered patent is a really important piece, and I'll tell you why. When we talk about deep learning, there's an endless number of frameworks out there. The two most popular, of course, being Caffe and TensorFlow from Google. These are image recognition frameworks that have been built for deep learning. And while they can be reverse engineered to a degree for the purposes of cybersecurity, they neither provide the speed nor the accuracy that our framework does. And the reason is simple. We have built it from the ground up, end to end, to be all about cybersecurity. And that's where our patents are wrapped around and protect. You see that we have significant strategic investors from NVIDIA, all the way up through HP and Millennium are huge, Samsung Ventures definitely, and others, and more are coming online all the time. The two kind of big call outs that I like on this screen are the OEM deals with HP. We competed in a process against dozens and dozens and dozens of other vendors over a year to become HP's security vendor for all of their laptops. Right now, if you go purchase an HP laptop, it will come with a product called a HP SureSense, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And that is a rebranded or renamed Deep Instinct. And that's a really important strategic deal because they took a look at a tremendous number of markers over a very long time. And that's excellent validation for our product and our technology's capabilities. So what we're doing here at Deep Instinct is we're changing the conversation a bit. For a very long time, number of years, CISOs, CIOs, CEOs, they've all been told the same thing. You're going to get breached, so you need to put everything into remediation and incident response services. The challenge with doing that, of course, is that this is an incredibly expensive proposition. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of manpower, and a lot of money when you start dealing with problems post-breach. But we've kind of fallen into this mindset that it's going to happen. At Deep Instinct, we are challenging that belief simply because you can train artificial brains to stop those breaches in the first place. And as you'll see, we're going to cover that in sub 20 milliseconds pre-execution. So we're taking that detection and response mindset and we're shifting it to a predict and prevent mindset. And that's exactly what you can do with Deep Instinct. We're seeing a number of predict and prevent capabilities, not just in cybersecurity with us, but across the deep learning landscape with multiple disciplines. And we'll start talking about some of those disciplines a little later on. So the idea, of course, is a single platform where we're going to take care of any threat and we can go anywhere. And that's the idea. As we move to a mobile workforce, to a BYOD workforce, as we start seeing the perimeter get effectively smaller and smaller in the sense that more people, more employees are operating outside their company's perimeter, or you can even look at it the other way, where now the perimeter is everywhere. The perimeter is your laptop when you're at a Starbucks. The perimeter is your cell phone when you're walking down the street. We have to have this mindset that you must be protected everywhere because everywhere is effectively your corporate environment. And that's what our product aims to protect and ultimately solve. So let's talk about the cybersecurity challenge. This shouldn't come as news to anyone listening to this, but obviously over 350,000 a day. This is a problem. There is no human on earth that could keep up even 10 years ago. Certainly we're out of the realm now. This number right here completely blows traditional AV out of the water. You simply can't adopt and adapt fast enough. And here's one of the challenges. When in a interview was conducted, 67% thought that they were experiencing a data breach or had been breached in 2018. And the statistics go on and on. We see the cost of a breach on average. We see the number of cybersecurity teams that are understaffed. This is a challenge. And we see that understaffing simply because it requires an exceptional amount of talent, discipline, and education to be effective in these roles. And finding the human power to do that is becoming increasingly more difficult. So this is the landscape. This is what we're up against as a cybersecurity company to try and help other companies solve. And this is the big one. This is why we've seen solutions fail more and more, or at least begin struggling more and more. Existing solutions, quite simply put, have plateaued. The AV stuff, that was surpassed a long, long time ago. But we're now even seeing the next generation, and I put that in quotes, the next generation machine learning tools are beginning to struggle. Simply because as the attacks become more advanced, as we start seeing new and different features, the feature extraction methodology of machine learning cybersecurity tools simply cannot keep up. So we've seen this plateau now for a number of years, but yet the threat and sophistication of attacks have continued to increase. And then, of course, there's the big one, the elephant in the room that everyone is waiting for. The first time we start seeing AI-based malware. There's even been arguments made that we've seen it already at the state sponsor level, where we're seeing machine learning algorithms, or maybe even so, deep learning artificial brains, developing malware to defeat cybersecurity solutions. This is where we know the threat landscape is going. This is where I think government agencies and every CISO deep down knows this is where the threat landscape is going. So we're going to have to bring tools to bear to solve this problem sooner rather than later. Deep Instinct started doing that in 2015. So the traditional approach, we've all seen it, we all know it doesn't work. A new piece of malware comes out. There's a big infection and everyone sits down to analyze the features of that infection. From that point on, the features of the attack are extracted and loaded into machine learning algorithms, or signatures are created, or heuristic models are updated. But what happens? We see a mutation to that exact same malware, and then the process starts all over again. This chart can go on ad infinitum, simply because that's how it works. They keep adapting, they keep building on the successes of previous code until they're successful again. And we've been dealing with this now for 40 years. This is the exact same approach cybersecurity has taken for a long time. And yes, we have faster tools today. Yes, we have more advanced tools today. Machine learning cybersecurity products certainly aren't bad. They're just not able to keep up in the way that we're going to need them to very soon, in the same way that AV fell behind. And this is something I want to make a call out to, because to me, it's very important. What you're looking at is an actual screenshot of one of the world's leading EDR tools. This is something that they come to market with. This is part of their existing marketing strategy. Survival of the fastest, they say. The 1-10-60 rule, and they're proud of this. They're proud that it takes 1 minute to detect. They're proud that it takes 10 minutes to investigate. And they're proud that it takes 60 minutes to remediate and contain that threat. These are numbers that they post because of how fast they are. But I don't think anyone listening to this video now would look at those numbers and think that they're fast. I think we all know that within 10 minutes, within 60 minutes, if you're dealing with a particularly crafty piece of ransomware, whether it's WannaCry from X number of years ago or GanCrab more recently, if you're dealing with something like this, in 60 minutes, your environment is encrypted. In 60 minutes, you might be on the way to go out of business. These numbers are fast for an EDR. The challenge is EDRs are not an effective way to solve this problem. You see an actual quote from Gartner at the bottom. EDR capabilities relies heavily on the skills and experience of the security administrators using the product day to day. And as we saw from a previous slide, those security experts are in very short demand. The number, of course, 69% said they were understaffed. EDR products are fantastic. They do their job well, but they do need experts. They do need IR specialists. They do need those trained incident responders, those trained remediation experts. This is not a product you can place in the hands of a level 1 SOC and say, protect our environment. simply because they are incredibly advanced pieces of software that require an advanced level of expertise. So I look at these numbers and I say to myself, they're probably the fastest CDR in the market. They may even be the best CDR in the market. The problem isn't this particular product or this particular vendor. The problem is that EDRs are not solving the problem. So when we look at survival of the fastest, this is where deep instinct is. Pre-execution. Can't stress that part enough, because right at the top of this conversation, we are not an EDR. We are not waiting for the bad thing to begin happening in the hopes that we can detect it, investigate it, and ultimately stop it. Pre-execution. That means before a human being clicks on anything, as the bits are being written to disk, the artificial brain is examining that situation in 20 milliseconds or less. In 50 milliseconds or less, the brain has already investigated the threat. There's already a forensics output for you. This is something that's being done, again, pre-execution autonomously. And in less than 60 seconds, we can send isolation commands if necessary. But I think, as you'll see as you continue to look at this, when you are a pre-execution prevention tool, which is exactly what Deep Instinct is, you will find that even that need, that desire to send isolation commands or go through remediation simply doesn't exist, because these threats are going to be stopped before they ever get started. The cost of detection is expensive. The longer you wait, the more you end up paying. Maybe not in terms of the ransom being requested by, say, a piece of ransomware, but the longer something goes on, the greater the hit to your reputation, the greater the financial cost goes up in terms of incident response and remediation. All of these things have to be factored in when a company comes under attack. So this isn't even about the cost of a tool. It's not even about how much you have to pay in Bitcoin. It comes down to what were the services that were required to clean up this event. What was the cost to reputation or even stock price? These are all things that get factored in as time goes on. So the longer an event is taking place, the more it's costing you on top of what it may cost you just to unlock your environment. This is what Deep Instinct is solving. When our customers get faced with these types of threats, they don't have to worry about this time to cost, because it never actually occurred. The problem didn't happen because it was prevented pre-execution in less than 20 milliseconds. So, is real-time threat prevention possible? Yes, it is, but it needs some requirements. First of all, to be real-time, or zero time as we say, it must be pre-execution. The moment you let someone click on something, it's not zero time anymore. Okay, an event is already in motion. So it must be pre-execution. It has to be autonomous. It has to have the ability to identify threats, not just known, but unknown as well. It must identify unknown threats, or else you're kind of back to that need for remediation again. It also has to be able to protect against any type of attack. And this is something we stress constantly. There are some very good tools out there, certainly not taking anything away from them. And there are some tools out there that, quite frankly, do a phenomenal job on, say, PE files. But it's when you start getting away from PE files and you start getting into things such as PDF or Office files, maybe APKs for Android or Mac-O files for Mac, suddenly these solutions start to degrade in their efficacy. This often isn't a problem of the technology. It's a problem of the fact that to solve the problem of some of these more obscure malware vectors, a human being had to perform feature extraction, which requires time, effort, money, and expertise that a company may not possess. So while the tool itself might be capable of it, the humans around that tool that are building the algorithms, that are doing the manual feature extraction, simply aren't. And then more importantly, the solution has to be everywhere. As I mentioned at the top of the presentation, the perimeter is everywhere now. And we have to be concerned when we're on the go. We have to be concerned when we're on the plane or in the coffee shop or even walking down the street with our phone. We have to make sure that the assets that we're in charge of protecting are protected all the time. So here's a couple call outs that I want to make on exactly the accolades that we've received throughout 2019. This is the SE Labs report. You see right at the top, tested and proven. This is a publicly available report. It's available both from SE Labs as well as Deep Instinct's website. And essentially, they tested us over X number of samples, and you see the results in big bold letters right there on the left. 100% prevention with 0 false positives. This was an SE Labs world first. I think it might even be a world first in the fact that a security company produced a 100% prevention, 0 false positive report. That's really important. Now, does Deep Instinct claim to be a 100% prevention tool? No. And this reason is simple. The brain must continue to learn over time. Will Deep Instinct get there one day? Well, that's certainly the stretch goal, of course. But until now, we have to stay cognizant of the fact that malware is pretty crafty. But are we better than everyone else? No question about that. Do we have a higher efficacy rate ranging in the 99.8+%? Yes, we do. So, and our false positive rates, as you're going to see on one of these upcoming slides, is absolutely phenomenal. We, in real world scenarios, we are often in the millionth percent range. Well, think about that. That's not 1% or 2% like you see from EDR. That's not even 0.1% like you may see from certain companies that let their marketing team write their false positive rate. Okay, we're talking about 0.000001%. That's phenomenal, and that's real world scenarios. And that's what we're doing all the time. Every time we produce a new artificial brain, we are driving down that false positive rate because false positives are incredibly costly for a company. At just 30,000 events, a CISO may say, well, my product only has a 1% false positive rate. Well, 1% sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty low until you realize that at just 30,000 events, which, let's be honest, there's a lot of companies that wished they only got 30,000 events a day. We're talking about hundreds of false positives, and they require humans to investigate at, let's say, an average investigation time of 10 minutes or so. You're talking about hours and hours and hours of work per day, 365 days a year, that a full-time employee is spending chasing ghosts in the network. We can return operational efficiency back to these organizations by letting their talented employees do what they do best, which is optimize their network, deliver projects on time and under budget, and continually improve upon the mechanism that they have in place for IT or SOC. Here are those numbers that I promised. This information was taken from the field. You see we got a tier 1 university, leading healthcare lab, and hospitality network. These are real numbers that we pulled. And you're looking at those top and you're saying, wow, 220 billion files scanned. And think about that, 220 billion files scanned. And yet, if you look at how many attacks were prevented, the number of false positives, you can see the rates. This is phenomenal. This is the real world scenarios that our customers are experiencing all the time. And this is something that we're, quite frankly, we're really proud of. And this is the problem that we're solving. The other big call out of 2019 is the HP OEM, the first of what we hope is many. So if an HP product is purchased right now, it will come with a solution on it called HP SureSense. HP SureSense is a renamed Deep Instinct. They made a big splash with a press release a number of months ago. The information is available on their website. And essentially, it was many, many, many dozens of competitors over a year process where HP proceeded to throw an endless number of attacks and criteria at all of us. And absolutely heads and tails, Deep Instinct stood above everyone else, not just in the pre-execution capability, but in the pure efficacy rate. And this is something that HP said, we want to make sure that any consumer, whether it's business or private individual, that purchases an HP laptop knows that they're going to get HP quality with quality security. And that's exactly what they deliver with their partnership with Deep Instinct. So the cybersecurity, the deep learning cybersecurity solution. We already talked about zero-time threat prevention, and it's got to be everywhere. Endpoint, mobile, and you see up there, network perimeter. That's right. We certainly do not call ourselves an endpoint company at Deep Instinct. We're a deep learning company. Now that we have this phenomenal brain, this artificial brain that can solve these problems, we're putting it everywhere, because why wouldn't you? As I mentioned before, everything is the perimeter now. So we have to make sure that the brain is protecting everything everywhere. Cross-OS capabilities, Windows, iOS, Android, Chrome OS, Mac OS. And when we talk about Windows, that's not just laptop, desktop, but that's virtual environments. It's embedded Windows systems. It's server. The idea is to put it everywhere. We see here file protection. Sure, we're all used to that, right? We're all used to PEs and PDFs and doc files. What about fileless? They're certainly becoming more prevalent in 2019, and moving forward, they're going to be a more prevalent attack vector. So you need a solution that can solve that problem. We're already there. We can already solve the problem of fileless attacks. And this next one, zero risk, has been real important to our existing customers. A lot of times you're going to talk to places and they're going to say, wow, you know, you got this great technology, we love it. The problem is we just signed a 3-year deal with XYZ vendor. The problem is we've got 100,000 nodes and it's incredibly time consuming and costly to rip and replace. You don't need to rip and replace with Deep Instinct. While you certainly can, no question there, we can absolutely operate in an environment where we're the sole piece of protection, definitely. We're also an augmentation play. We happily coexist alongside any other solution, whether it's traditional AV or EDR, et cetera. And we augment their solution's ability to perform. So it's a risk-free endeavor for CIOs, CEOs, CISOs to sit down and say, love your product. If you work in my environment with everything else, let's get you in here. That's really helpful. And again, autonomous. We are on-device prevention, which means each and every device, whether it's phone, laptop, server, et cetera, has its own copy of the artificial brain. There is no need to go out to a cloud to get analysis done. There is no need to send it anywhere. There's no sandboxes that are spinning up. There's no databases that are being referenced. You don't need to do any of that, because each and every asset is going to have a copy of its own artificial brain. That's why all the processing is taking place on asset in sub 20 milliseconds. And again, operationally efficient. We only update twice a year. Sometimes we only update once a year. And this is an important distinction to make, because I know there's a number of vendors out there that make that same claim. We only update once or twice a year. I've seen them at shows. We've all heard and read the marketing. What I've always found curious about this statement, of course, is that when a new threat comes out, like Crisis or Milobot, Trickster, Trick Booster, GanCrab, Dharma, any number of these, it is a matter of public record what vendors succeed and fail at detecting or preventing these particular attacks. And what I often find very curious is a lot of these vendors, they very proudly proclaim that they only do 1 or 2 updates a year. When these new threat comes out, they miss them. And then anywhere between 24 and 48 hours later, their tool suddenly starts catching them. Well, that's called an update. That's exactly what had to happen. Whether it was a new heuristic model or a new feature that was sent to the machine learning algorithm, that's exactly what happened. It was an update. So while it is true that many of these vendors may produce only 1 or 2 algorithmic models a year, to say that they don't update is a bit of a stretch. Well, Deep Instinct, we really only do about 2 updates a year. And what I mean by that is we never update the artificial brain. We produce a new artificial brain, but once one has been trained, once it's been sent to the field, once it's operating in a customer's environment, it is no longer in the act of training. We do not train on customer data. It does not learn moving forward. So obviously, the #1 question we get asked is, okay, I've got this brain, you sold it to me, it's in my environment, and it's 6 months old. You mean to tell me that this brain is going to catch the next 0 day that's going to come out next week? The answer is yes, it absolutely will. And it's because the artificial brain is not looking for features. The artificial brain is not looking for signatures. It's not performing heuristics. The artificial brain has been trained on what malware is. So new pieces, even if they are brand new pieces, as in a new family of malware. And remember, to be considered a new family of malware, you cannot use borrowed code and you must attack a computer in a new way. So even under those scenarios where we're dealing with a 0-day new family of malware, the artificial brain, even more than a year old, is still going to protect you, prevent that threat before any human ever had to double click on it in sub 20 milliseconds. And we do that with less than 1% CPU utilization. Again, because we're not relying on heuristic models, because we're not referencing databases, and because we're not reaching out over a cloud. We simply do not put the load on a CPU the way a lot of traditional vendors do, the way a lot of machine learning vendors do. So as a result, even under load, you are going to see it operate at sub 1%. And we get asked the question all the time, is that the aggregate number? Is that sub 1% an hour, a day? Nope, that's sub 1% all the time. If you watch the process, you'll see it go from 0.0 to 0.1, 0.3, 0.1, 0.0, 0.1. That's what you can expect to see as it bounces along there all day long, spending most of its time at 0.0. And the reason is we only care about deltas. That is new writes to disk or modifications of files on disk. Anytime that save button is clicked, anytime something new is being written to disk, the brain is examining it in sub 20 milliseconds. So how does the brain get trained? We use a form of supervised training. What that means is that we know what the samples are when we feed them into the neural network, the deep neural network. We know if they're good, we know if they're bad. If they're bad, we know how they're bad. So we have that information, and we send the files through the DNN, where it proceeds to process on them and attempts to make a decision. If it gets it wrong, we assist it in trying again. And we say, nope, go figure it out again. And we run this model over and over again until we have an artificial brain that is suitably strong in its ability to detect and prevent all of these threats. We do this to the tune of hundreds of millions of threats, and those are all gathered from more than 40 sources in total. Some are paid subscriptions, others are free services, such as VirusTotal. We also pulled from Reversing Labs, as you see there, and a number of vendor repositories as well. And as all of these things flow into our repository, now numbering more than 3 billion files, we use this information, and those are where we pull our sets out of to train the new brain. When we go through each training cycle, sometimes we add new file types, sometimes we add more advanced versions of previous file types. So every brain is always stronger than the previous one. It always has less false positives. It always has a greater efficacy rate when it comes to detection. And then, of course, what do we use this massive repository for? Well, for one thing, we use it for our D-Cloud. This is an additional layer on top of the artificial brain. You're going to see that we have multiple layers. We have on execution capabilities. We've got whitelist and blacklist. We have network isolation capabilities. We have script control. These are all multiple layers, not to replace the brain, but to augment it. So the D-Cloud is one of these augmentations. It's Deep Instinct's personal reputation system that help augment the brain if a customer so desires. This is not a requirement, but it's something that we would hope they use, just like we hope that they would use our shellcode injection engine, as well as our process protection and memory protection engines and script control, because we're certainly all about bringing the most possible security to a customer. So let's take a look at the process itself. In just 24 to 48 hours, we can train a brain. So what do we spend our time, the months and months and months between that doing? Mostly developing the data set. It takes hundreds of millions of files to prepare a data set to make the next brain stronger than the previous one. And as mentioned before, we get a lot of those files from third-party sources. We also have one of the most advanced research teams in the world that are constantly trolling the darknet. We have a variety of avatars that exist within threat communities that allow us to get access and information to campaigns long before they are launched. Homemade malware is a big deal. A lot of our team come from state level in cyber intelligence experts, where they were tasked with creating state level malware, state level intrusion capabilities. This is the expertise that they help Deep Instinct with when it comes to developing really advanced pieces of malware. And then, of course, like a lot of places, we've got mutators where we will take a piece of code and we will mutate it hundreds or thousands of times, all in an attempt to show the artificial brain the many, many iterations that a piece of malware can undergo. So as I mentioned before, hundreds of millions of malicious and benign files, and that's a really important distinction, or rather point, because you must teach an artificial brain what is good along with what is bad, so it can begin to understand the differences between the two. So that's obviously a really big deal here. And then that last piece there, creating noise. This is also important. We have to be able to mutate and modify these files so that the artificial brain gets exposure to these different iterations, gets exposure to these different ways that a file can go under a types of transformation, to teach the brain what all of these different pieces look like and how it can get more and more effective. And then we bring all of that through the deep neural network, the DNN. And we use NVIDIA's GPUs to do that. NVIDIA, of course, one of our strategic investors, they held a deep learning contest in 2017. There were no other cybersecurity vendors at the time because there were no cybersecurity vendors that were doing deep learning except us. So we were up against the likes of things like Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft and Tesla and Google, et cetera. And we ended up winning. And from that moment forward, NVIDIA became a strategic investor of us. And that is a competitive advantage. When we have access to some of their most advanced GPUs. Now, keep in mind, the GPUs we use are not something that you're going to buy off Amazon or at Best Buy. You're not going to be able to put them into your gaming computer. These are absolute enterprise scale graphics cards that you're not going to find except by special order with NVIDIA itself. And this is what powers our deep neural network. And as I touched on before, and this is something that we're going to keep repeating, right? Any file, any device, any OS, that is the goal. Because when we can do that, we are that holistic solution across the board wherever the end user may be and whatever environment that they're operating under. And again, only 1 to 2 updates a year, less than 1% CPU utilization, even under load, and just 150 meg of install disk. It's a very lightweight agent, very lightweight brain that resides in the environment. So, pre-execution. This is the bread and butter, the heart and soul of what it is we do. This is what separates us from being an EDR as pretty much as far as you can be. Because as I mentioned, we do not wait for a human being to click on a thing before we determine if it's good or bad. We're going to be performing analysis as the bits are being written to disk. The brain is making its determination if something is good or something is bad. And we're going to be doing that across the board. And you see the multiple engines we've got there. The artificial brain right at the top, file reputation, script control, blacklisting. These are all things that are happening pre-execution. But we also have on-execution capabilities. Let's paint a scenario where something did manage to evade the brain, an incredibly rare event, but let's, for the sake of argument, let's pretend that that happened. Something managed to evade the brain. On top of that, we have our on-execution capabilities. So now we're in a situation where something's there and a human double-clicked on it. Well, what's that piece of malware going to do? It's going to perform a couple different functions. Maybe it's going to inject into processes. Maybe it's going to spawn PowerShell scripts or even JavaScripts. Maybe it's going to go so far as to download additional dropper information. It could start attacking memory. We have engines that are monitoring all of this in real time. And I'm actually going to take you through an example here shortly about what that looks like. And then post-execution. We're going to provide a forensics analysis on exactly what happened. Now, we're going to prevent that threat, but you're still going to get that analysis. So you can see exactly what you were dealing with. That includes the classification, threat analysis, and yes, even the ability to do a form of remediation. We can go ahead and add whitelist or blacklist capability in sub 60 seconds. We can also isolate a device from the network in sub 60 seconds. So we have these post-execution capabilities, of course, but obviously shifting all of our attention to the left-hand side, pre-execution with the artificial brain is the absolute pinnacle of what our product does. So let's kind of go through some scenarios here. The use case is a phishing email with ransomware. So I'm going to take you through all the steps, and there's a saying we have here at Deep Instinct where we take multiple swings at the same pitch. Multiple swings at the same pitch. And that's exactly what you're going to see in this scenario. So the end user has received a phishing email, and it's a PDF is attached, and they're told, hey, you got to open this thing. It could be anything, right? It could be a resume. It could be a purchase order. It could be any number of things. And there are departments that are, quite frankly, it's their job to open attachments, right? I mean, it's an HR's job to open, resumes. It's a purchasing order's job to open up POs. I mean, this is what they do for a living. So you can't say, don't open these files. So we have to have a way to protect them. So you see here, step 1.1, that's right. The received invoice is a PDF attachment that has malicious JavaScript embedded in it to pull down another file. That is the scenario. Well, what's going to happen? The brain's going to step in, and it's going to say, wait a minute, this PDF is weaponized. So it's not what you think it is. We're going to go ahead and stop this. And you see right there in the screen, right in the kind of the upper left there, file blocked. That's exactly what's going to happen. The end user will be notified that that attachment they just received has been weaponized, and it is dangerous. But step 1.2, this is the multiple swings at the same pitch scenario. Let's pretend it didn't catch that PDF, that weaponized PDF. So here comes swing number 2. That JavaScript is going to grab a PE file, and it's going to bring it down to the system in an attempt to have a now piece of ransomware embedded on the system. Once again, we're back in play. That artificial brain is going to see that PDF come down, and we're going to, or I'm sorry, the PE come down, and we're going to say, wait a minute, this is ransomware. We're not going to let this onto the system. So even in that first scenario, let's say the company didn't have script control turned on, so that JavaScript was successful in pulling down that PE file. Okay, so we get multiple swings at this pitch. We still haven't given up, and we still don't think that this PDF is completely safe. So even if script control was turned off, the brain is back in play when that piece of ransomware comes down. But now we're going to have to play make-believe again. And we're going to pretend that so far, everything has missed everything. Now, like I said, this is an incredibly rare event. But the purpose of these slides is showing how many swings we're going to take at that same pitch. Okay, so script control wasn't turned on. That's why that JavaScript executed. Now that PE file tried to come down, but for some reason, the brain didn't catch it. A far-fetched event, but let's, for the sake of argument, that brain didn't catch it. Now we're at step 2. That PE now resides on the desk, and it's been called. Maybe it was called by a form of task manager or by a PowerShell escalation. Maybe it was called by the user itself. Okay? So what's going to happen? It's going to attempt to inject itself into memory. It has to take over a process. It's going to perform the encryption process. Well, not on our watch, because we have more engines still that are going to sit there and monitor for shellcode injection, memory protection, process takeover. And we're going to be monitoring these things in real time. So the moment a piece of ransomware attempts to inject into these scenarios, you're going to run into the case where Deep Instinct is once again right there. So think about how many chances we're going to get to stop this problem. Now, we're probably going to stop it out of the gate because the customer is going to have script control turned on. That JavaScript is never going to get anywhere, and that's the end of that. But look at how many times our product is going to sit there and say, no matter what's going on with this malicious PDF, no matter what it tried to do, no matter what this ransomware tried to do, no matter what the encryption process was, our product is there with a solution to step in and solve that problem. And then finally, all of this is going to be notified directly to a SOC team or some form of administration team. They're going to get alerts. They're going to get SMTP alerts, they're going to get SNMP alerts, things are going to go to their SIM tool, perhaps even an automation tool. And right there, we can send the remediation request if needed. So if an administrator even says, you know what, I know this was prevented, but I'm going to isolate this because I want to grab that binary and I want to do an investigation here. Why did someone think that that particular machine was a target? What allowed that machine to become a target in the first place? So this would allow an administrator to isolate the asset and perform a full investigation if they really desire. But remember, this is going to be more of an audit investigation than an incident response because there was no incident. This is just going to allow an administrator to find out why that machine or that individual was targeted. And all of this, everything that you see here, the first part, steps 1 and 2, with all the sub-steps, were happening in sub 20 milliseconds. And this last step was happening in sub 60 seconds. So that is everything about the product itself. In future videos, we're going to do a full product demonstration showing off the dashboard as well as live malware prevention across multiple threats. And we're also going to be covering videos on machine learning and deep learning specifically. Thank you very much.